Everyone has their favorite Disney villain. You have your funny villains, your serious villains, the scary villains, and so on. But what about the darkest? While Disney movies don't tread into darker waters, with so many villains, there are a few that have more mature storylines. Hey guys, I'm Brad with WickedBinge, and today we ask, which Disney villain is the darkest? Before we start, today we're only covering villains featured in the Disney animated canon, so no Pixar or Disney television. And secondly, when analyzing what makes a villain dark, we're going to take a lot into account. This includes not only their actions, but also their backstories, motivations, and more. First, we're going to start with Chernabog from Fantasia. Originating from the movie's Night on Bald Mountain segment, this demonic antagonist is literally the devil himself. He's got a lot going for him, but what makes Chernabog so evil and dark isn't necessarily his background. It's more from what he doesn't do. While he parades around his followers before they're cast into a fiery pit, Chernabog doesn't do much when you really think about it. Yet we still understand him as the personification of all things horrible. You fully realize that Chernabog can commit some truly wretched acts, but by only getting a small taste of his evilness, it lets your imagination fill the blanks. A villain whose power comes from the limitless possibility of our imaginations, Chernabog could have gotten another spot on our list, but due to his limited amount of actual character and screen time, we felt number 10 was the best possible placement. Even with his lack of screen time, Chernabog has cemented himself as one of Disney's most well-known and darkest villains. In 9th place is Maleficent from Sleeping Beauty. Maleficent has long been one of Disney's most beloved villains, and it's hard not to see why. She has a scary design, several amazing lines, and can even turn into a dragon. And of course, her status as one of the darkest villains has only added to her popularity. Maleficent is similar to Chernabog in that both seem like the personification of all things evil. Like Maleficent turns into a dragon, you can't find a creature that better fits the mold of classic villainy if you tried. Maleficent is also unique among many of the classic era Disney villains, in that she's the first one to get any sort of genuine backstory. While it's small, her background involving her anger at not being invited to a royal ceremony gives her more depth than pretty much any other villain from that era. Her ultimate goal, to rid the kingdom of its princess, is also dark and still feels like a brand of evil unique to her even after all the Disney villains introduced since then.
Do you hear that, my pet?
Unfortunately, just like Chernabog, Maleficent is only a number 9 because she doesn't have the same amount of depth as those that came after her. At number 8, we have to go old school with the evil queen from Snow White. Despite being the very first villain, the queen still has a unique identity even after all this time. How many other Disney villains were willing to kill not just a child, but one that was in their own family? And although she originally planned on carrying out this plan via a henchman, she ultimately ends up giving Snow the poisonous apple herself, which adds a whole new layer of evil. It was only intervention from the prince that brought Snow back to life, meaning this queen has come far closer to victory than even some modern villains. The evil queen might lack depth and nuance of a lot of her successors, but her role as Disney's first villain and her style of evildoing is more than enough to cement her as one of their darkest villains. In 7th place is Doris from Meet the Robinsons. Right now, a lot of you are no doubt confused as to why we believe this character is so dark. She's just a bowler hat. What could she possibly be capable of? Well, how about the enslavement of all of humanity? Although the bowler hat guy might be the film's main villain, Doris is the true antagonist. Doris guided Goob on a big quest to change history, and as soon as that was achieved, she cast him aside for her own plans. Angry at her creator for discarding her, she creates a dark future where everyone is enslaved, and those who do not become followers suffer a far worse fate.
He's using you, Goob, and when she gets what she wants, she'll get rid of you.
Beyond just the dark imagery of a world where Doris is ruler, beyond the fact that she's one of the few Disney villains to win in some way, there does exist some reality behind all the fantasy. Just like witches and demons, stories about machines gaining sentience and rising up against humans are tales as old as time. But whereas demons feel more fantastical, the idea of a machine revolution seems to only become more realistic as time progresses. Doris might seem far-fetched compared to the next characters, but the fear of a robot uprising persists to this day, and it's only growing. In 6th place, we have Cruella de Vil from 101 Dalmatians. Cruella is a lot like Doris. While her actions may seem strange, as you look more into their characters, you see that they reflect real problems within society. In the case of Cruella, she's obsessed with animal furs and looks to add the fur of the Dalmatians to her growing fashion collection. Animal cruelty is horrid, even for Disney villains, but it's even darker to see it aimed at man's best friend. Cruella is far from the only Disney villain to go up against animals, but this motive easily makes her one of the darkest to do so. Some might argue that Cruella's personality, always screaming and being generally unpleasant, makes her less of a threat, but we argue it makes her an even more dangerous character. The Disney villains up to this point were relatively calm and collected, but Cruella throws caution to the wind and commands every scene. In some ways, it makes her more real. You probably don't know somebody as calm as Maleficent, but you have encountered somebody as boisterous as Cruella. Not only that, but she's a reckless driver. Evil magic is great, but if you want to incite true horror, show that the villain doesn't care about the rules of the road. While Cruella might seem as out there as other Disney villains, her despicable attitude and scheming makes her one of Disney's darkest. In fifth place, it's Lady Tremaine from Cinderella. Tremaine's villainy is similar to Cruella, as both are obsessed with the superficial and are abusive. However, Tremaine's brand of evil seems to be a more refined version of Cruella's, which is why we would argue she is the darker character. Lady Tremaine has spent not only most of Cinderella's life abusing her, but she's done the same to her stepsisters.
Of course. I said, if.
She pits them against each other to see which one will be more loyal, a battle that Cinderella always loses. It's evil and also real, which is very unfortunate. Plenty of people who live with siblings in abusive households can relate to Cinderella's misfortunes, which makes Tremaine's actions even more heartbreaking. And it's also creepy because Tremaine is a cunning yet soft-spoken antagonist. You'll start to see us emphasize villains who feel like real people over the fantastical characters, and Tremaine is definitely a member of the former group. Her awful parenting of all three, as well as her cold demeanor, are more than enough to prove that she deserves to be up here with the darkest of Disney villains. At 4, we have Roark from Atlantis: The Lost Empire. Roark might seem like an upstanding military commander when we first meet him, but after the expedition crew arrives in Atlantis, a much darker side of Roark begins to take shape. He reveals that he's only interested in taking the Lost Empire's relics to show as pieces of a museum display, even if these are needed by their people to survive.
It's called natural selection. We're just helping it along.
This alone shows a lack of empathy for others, in a way that a lot of Disney villains don't quite measure up to. Disney villains seldom betray their sidekicks, but Roark doesn't really care for his comrades and does it anyway. He's also responsible for killing the Atlantean king, making him one of the few villains in all of Disney to kill a major character. As the climax begins, Roark continues to believe he's in the right as he battles against the Atlanteans and even attempts to take out Milo during a one-on-one fight. While he might be surrounded by flying airships and laser weapons, Roark's identity as a general who will gladly take what he wants from foreign land without care is not only a strong motivation for a villainous character, but also one that feels real to our world. It's not unlike the storyline that Governor Ratcliffe goes through in Pocahontas, although Roark is a lot more threatening and villainous. History has shown us many individuals who have taken what they wanted from others without care, and Roark fits that well. His actions fit not only the fantastical world of Atlantis, but also the real world, and that's by no means an easy balance. With all of his horrific acts, as well as his plan that nearly wiped out an entire civilization, Roark is one of Disney's darkest villains. In third place is Tarzan's Clayton. While Cruella might be the more famous villain to have antagonized animals, Clayton is definitely more evil. He hunts animals for sport and will sell them illegally if it means he gets his fortune. In essence, he's a big game hunter who will gladly kill even man if it gets in the way of him and his prey. When we discuss Cruella, we mention how her personality might make some think she's wackier than she is dark. That's not the case with Clayton, although there are some comedic scenes that feature him. From the get-go, you understand not to play around with him. Like Roark, Clayton kills a major character, in his case Kerchak, Tarzan's father figure. More than anything else, Clayton is so high up on our list because he feels like a character who indeed could have existed back in the early 20th century Europe. Characters like Cruella and Tremaine have some sense of reality wrapped up in their characters, but they still have that classic Disney villain feel. Clayton doesn't have this issue, and because of that, he's one of the darkest Disney villains to date. We said Clayton felt like a real person, so how about a villain who was based on somebody from history? In second place is Shan Yu from Mulan. Shan Yu is a warlord. His body count is likely in the thousands, and he leads one of the most powerful armies mankind has ever seen. Shan Yu is even implied to have killed a child. If that isn't enough to make him one of Disney's darkest foes, we don't know what else would convince you. Shan Yu's main goal is to take over China, and he comes close to victory. The fact that he came so close to taking over a massive country makes him more dangerous and darker. He doesn't care about politics or money, just power. In some ways, he feels like Roark and Clayton merged into one power-hungry individual. He has all of Roark's military experience, Clayton's bloodlust, and none of the few redeeming spots of those characters. He's caused more death and destruction than any other Disney villain by a huge margin. And in first place is Frollo from The Hunchback of Notre Dame. You all saw it coming, and truthfully, how can we argue otherwise? I mean, the movie starts with Frollo's murder and attempted murder of a mother and her son respectively. While other villains have killed characters, never before has it been so immediate or so brutal. Then, Frollo commits just about every horrific act all the prior villains have done, yet even worse. Thought Lady Tremaine was a bad mother? She doesn't even come close to how awful Frollo treats Quasimodo. Did you think Roark was careless regarding the people of Atlantis? Frollo's actions nearly bring about the end of Paris. But what really sets Frollo apart from the rest isn't necessarily his actions or the severity of said actions. It's more from the mind they come from. In the case of all the other villains, they knew at some level that they were evil. They knew what they were doing and they relished in it. But that doesn't describe Frollo. He believes everything he does is for the good of society, no matter how horrific his actions are. It's that sense of heroism built into his character that not only makes him more real, but also a whole lot darker. A villain can do whatever they want, but if they see themselves as the bad guy, it somewhat lessens the effect. If that same character is doing them through the lens that they are the hero, however, it makes the character more horrible. So we have to give Frollo the dubious title of the darkest Disney villain of all time. Alright guys, that's it. Let us know in the comment section if you agree with our ranking, and tell us what we should cover next. Remember to hit that notification bell and binge more of our videos. But most importantly, stay wicked.